Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to day 3 of the International Reparation Debate Competition 2025. So far, we've seen 6 exciting debates from schools all across the world. And we've seen individuals battle it out and fight it out, something fierce to secure their spot in round 2. Now, today in match 7, we have 2 schools who'll be seeing if they'll be joining the ranks of that prestigious spot in round 2. And those 2 schools are Glenmuir High School, coming out of Jamaica, and CV Bethel Senior High School from the Bahamas. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and I'll be serving as your chair judge for this match. And with me are 2 other judges, my wing judges, who I will ask to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Javon Downey.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Javon Downey, and I'll be serving as a wing adjudicator in this debate competition. I am the business development specialist here at the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. And also joining me on this panel is Ms. Jordana Denton.
Hi everyone, so my name is Jordana Denton and I'll be serving as a wing adjudicator for this match. I serve as the digital media specialist for the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, and I hope that this match is exciting and I'm excited for the clash of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordana, and I'm excited as well. This competition would not have been possible without our sponsors and partners, and we want to give them a big shout out right now. We want to thank the University of the West Indies, CARICOM, the CARICOM Reparations Committee, the Center for Reparations Research, the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, the Repair Campaign, the PJ Patterson Institute for African Caribbean Public Advocacy, University of Hull, and of course, you, our viewing audience, for tuning in and ensuring that we all together are having a wonderful, wonderful time. At this point, I want to hear from the teams. And so I'm inviting the speakers from each team to introduce themselves, starting with the proposition team, Glenmuir High School.
Good morning. My name is Joshua Smith, and I serve as the first speaker for the proposition.
Good morning. My name is Kayla Powell, and I serve as the second speaker for the proposition.
And good morning. My name is Joby Dawkins, and I serve as the final speaker of the proposition.
Thank you very much to Glenmuir High School. And at this point, we invite our opposition team, CV Bethel Senior High School from Bahamas, to introduce themselves.
Good morning. So I'm Shamar J. Nottage, and I serve as the speaker 1 for the opposition team.
Good morning. My name is Kenisha Wright, and I serve as speaker number 2 for the opposition team.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Nash, and I will be serving as speaker 3 for the opposition team.
All right. Thank you very much. Teams, you have been briefed on the rules. The motion before us reads, quite an interesting one. This House believes that Britain's Industrial Revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. To open this debate, we invite the first speaker from the proposition team, Glenmuir High School.
3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable judges, distinguished members of the House, today I invite you to close your eyes and imagine Britain in the 18th century. Before the Industrial Revolution, it was a nation of rural communities plodding around slow, labor-intensive manual production. But then something remarkable happened. A transformation so profound, it changed the very fabric of life as we know it. Smoke billowed from towering chimneys. The hum of machines replaced the silence of still fields. This was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, a seismic shift that propelled Britain from agrarian simplicity to industrial greatness. Something changed. Something provided the capital, the manpower, the systems of trade and finance that propelled Britain to dominance. That catalyst was the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. We, the proposition, firmly believe that Britain's industrial revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. We stand here today to correct the sanitized narrative of industrial brilliance arising out of nowhere. The Industrial Revolution from 1750 to 1850 was not an accident of geography or genius alone. It was the outcome of Britain having fuel, innovation, and most importantly, money. And that money came from the exploitation of enslaved Africans and the plantations of the Caribbean. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the Industrial Revolution is defined as the rapid development of industry that occurred in Britain in the late 18th and 19th centuries, brought about by the introduction of machinery. Significantly means to a large extent or degree, according to Merriam-Webster, and delay means to the act of postponing, hindering, or causing something to occur more slowly than normal, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, trafficking is the act of buying or selling people or of making money. Transatlantic means crossing across the Atlantic Ocean, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and it encompasses the countries within and between North and South America, Europe, and Africa. So to restate the moot, this house firmly believes that the rapid development of the industry that occurred in Britain in the late 18th and 19th centuries would have been largely hindered without the money made from the buying and selling of Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. So today I will address two key pillars of our argument. First, the creation of major industrial cities was fueled by trade with the colonies. And second, the slave-based plantation economy as a trading ground for capitalist practices. We will also address how slavery created the financial infrastructure and trade networks that allowed Britain's industries to flourish. And the products of enslaved labor were not solely destined for export, they became integral to British daily life, stimulating domestic markets and contributing directly to the country's industrial progress. And how slavery provided the raw materials that fueled the Industrial Revolution, proving that slavery was the invisible pushing force that pushed the Industrial Revolution forward. So why are we so confident in our argument? Because the Industrial Revolution was not merely a historical coincidence. At the same time as revolutions crumbled the nations like the French Revolution, Britain thrived due to a perfect trifecta: abundant capital, easy access to raw materials, and transformative innovation. The trafficking of Africans through the transatlantic slave trade ensured all three. Firstly, major industrial cities were fueled by slave trafficking. Liverpool, Bristol, and London became powerhouses due to slave trafficking profits. The very foundation of Britain's industrial wealth was built by trafficking, not just people, but specifically millions of Africans, men, women, and children from their homelands, and forced into unimaginable brutality to enrich an empire. So according to the former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, in his book Capitalism and Slavery, Liverpool dominated British slave trading, with 40% of all European slave voyages launching from its docks. The wealth gained was invested in shipbuilding, banks, and insurance companies. The growth of Lloyd's of London, now a global financial institution, began with underwriting slave ships. Without that capital, there would be no large-scale investments into factories, railways, and canals. The money made from enslaving Africans built the world as we know it. Now to my second point. The plantation system was a training ground for capitalism. Managing thousands of trafficked and enslaved Africans required sophisticated logistics, accounting methods, and insurance mechanisms, as well as risk assessment protocols. The principles of mass production, economies of scale, and managerial efficiency, as we praise today, were honed on plantations. Historian Kenneth Morgan emphasizes that Britain's financial system, including the creation of financial instruments, was perfected through managing the risks and profits of slavery. Allow me to illustrate a direct and undeniable link. James Watt, credited with refining the steam engine in 1776, was backed by the financial muscle of Matthew Boulton, whose family fortune was built on the transatlantic trafficking of Africans and profit from colonial exploitation. In fact, Watt's own father was involved in a slave ship outfitting and trading. We can even say that the beating heart of industrial revolution was pumped full of the blood and sweat and tears of Africans. The Watt steam engine, which powered hundreds of mines, cotton mills, and factories during the Industrial Revolution, was not merely an invention of genius, but a product financed and sustained by wealth extracted from the suffering of enslaved Africans. The opposition may claim industrialization was inevitable, but it is not so. Without the capital and commercial experience derived from slavery, industrial progress might not have happened, and Britain, and if it did, the pace would have been substantially slower. Trafficking and slavery was designed for the purpose of profit, and that profit accelerated Britain's industrial leap. Honorable adjudicators, the Industrial Revolution was not a miraculous spark of British ingenuity alone. It was forged from the stolen wealth, forced labor, and economic systems that were ruthlessly extracted from Africa and the Caribbean. The grand shipping fleets, towering factories, sprawling managerial precision, fine Britain's ascent, were perfected on plantations soaked in the blood and resilience would have been significant.
All right, and that is time elapsed. Thank you very much for that first speech, Glenmuir High School, coming from Miss Joshe Smith. Thank you. At this point in time, we invite the first opposition speaker, Shamar Nottage, to open the case for Team CV Bethel Senior High School.
Imagine a time where human lives were treated as mere commodities, where men, women, and children were forcibly taken from their homeland and sold as property, their worth measured by their labor. This dark chapter in history, the transatlantic slave trade, has often been linked to the success of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Honorable Chair, esteemed members of the House, and my respected colleagues, we, the opposition body, stand before you to argue strongly against the motion. The House believes that the Britain Industrial Revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. Fellow adjudicators, the Prime Minister would have you to believe that Britain's Industrial Revolution was deeply reliant on the transatlantic trafficking of Africans. However, while the Prime Minister paints a picture tied to this tragic trade, we must look at the broader picture and realize that far more complex factors drove Britain's industrialization. The Prime Minister stated that the Britain Industrial Revolution would have been largely hindered without the money made from slave trade, whereas funds were already being accumulated through the economic evolution, with Britain holding great economic success which was deeply tied to its control of the global commerce during this period. Ladies and gentlemen, the Industrial Revolution was not solely dependent on slave labor. It was propelled by innovation, economic evolution, technological advancement, all of which were well underway before the peak of the slave trade. Historian Robert C. Allen notes in the British Industrial Revolution, in global perspective, that in the mid-18th century, key technological advancements such as steam power and mechanized textile production spurred industrial growth. Britain was already developing independence of slave labor.
Excuse me.
Is that a point of information?
No, we dropped off the meeting. We're literally just joined back on the meeting.
We
We've
didn't
been
hear
off
anything.
as soon as.
All right. So we're going to allow for the repeating of the speech. We're going to restart the time. CV Bethel, you can restart your speech. Glenmuir, this is a privilege that will only be extended once. All right. So CV Bethel, you may restart your time and your speech.
Thank you very much.
Imagine a time when human lives were treated as mere commodities, where men, women, and children were forcibly taken from their homeland and sold as property, their work measured by their labor. This dark chapter in history, the transatlantic slave trade, has often been linked to the success of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Honorable Chair, esteemed members of the House, and my respected colleagues, we, the opposition body, stand before you to argue strongly against the motion. The House believes the British Industrial Revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. Fellow adjudicators, the Prime Minister would have you believe that Britain's Industrial Revolution was deeply reliant on the transatlantic trafficking of Africans. However, while the Prime Minister paints the picture tied to this tragic trade, we must look at the broader portrait and realize that far more complex factors drove Britain's industrialization. The Prime Minister stated that the British Industrial Revolution would have been largely hindered without the money made from slave trades, whereas funds were already being accumulated through the economic evolution, with Britain holding great economic success, which was deeply tied to its control of global commerce during this period. Ladies and gentlemen, the Industrial Revolution was not solely dependent on slave labor. It was propelled by innovation, economic evolution, and technological advancements, all of which were well underway before the peak of slave trade. Historian Robert C. Allen notes in the British Industrial Revolution, in global perspective, that in the mid-18th century, key technological advancements such as steam power and mechanized textile production spurred industrial growth. Britain was already developing independence of slave labor. This makes it clear that while the slave trade contributed to certain economic activities, it was not essential to Britain's Industrial Revolution. To commence, Britain's Industrial Revolution was primarily driven by technological innovations that increased in efficiency and production, rather than by slave labor. To illustrate, James Watt's improvements to the steam engine revolutionized production in factories, enabling a surge in manufacturing output. World History Encyclopedia, February 2023. Fundamentally, the central engine that powered the Industrial Revolution was a product of human ingenuity and investment in a forward-thinking society. Similarly, the spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves, revolutionized textile production, enabling a single worker to spin multiple threads simultaneously. The Industrial Revolution and its impact on European society, the Oxford History of Modern Europe. These technological advancements were the true catalyst of industrial growth. Historian Joel Mercier in the lever of riches, technological creativity, and economic progress argues that British inventors and entrepreneurs were already driving industrialization forward through their own creative innovations. The efficiency gained from machinery like the power loom and steam engines were responsible for Britain's dominance in production, not the manual labor of enslaved individuals thousands of miles away. Even without the wealth generated from the trafficking of Africans, Britain's economy was already primed for a shift from agrarianism to industrialization. Historian David Landis points out in The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, Britain's industrial success stemmed from its investment in mechanical innovation, factory organization, and domestic economic restructuring. Moreover, Britain's economic dominance, a key factor in its industrialization, was built on banking and trade networks rather than the transatlantic slave trade. Britain's economic success is deeply tied to its control of global commerce. According to historian Niall Ferguson in The Ascent of Money, Financial History of the World, Britain's financial institutions and banking systems were the true engine of its economic expansion by 1914. The development of joint stock companies and the London Stock Exchange allowed for unprecedented capital accumulation and investment in industrial enterprises. Additionally, Britain's dominance in maritime trade was instrumental in its economic growth. The country had the most powerful navy in the world, securing trade routes and ensuring the free flow of goods across the British Empire. The British Empire, A History of Imperialism, James C. Robertson. Its shipping networks facilitated commerce in textiles, coal, and manufactured goods, industries that grew exponentially due to Britain's industrial infrastructure, not simply because of raw materials supplied by slavery. Furthermore, historian P.J. Kane in British Imperialism, 1688 to 2000, highlights that Britain's economic expansion was heavily driven by financial capital and industrial reinvestment, rather than slave-based profits. In conclusion, while the trafficking of Africans may have contributed to the wealth of certain individuals, it was not the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution. The acceleration of the economy through the use of machinery inventions and Britain's dominance in commerce was already a significant factor in the eventual success of the Industrial Revolution. Noble adjudicators, without the transatlantic slave trade, the revolution would not have been significantly delayed. The key factors propelling industrialization were independent from slave labor. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Shamar Nottage from CD Bethel. We now invite the second speaker from Glenmuir High School, Miss Kalia Powell, to extend the case for side proposition.
Good question, Ravon. Shouldn't we pause for the cross questioning?
Indeed. Just before you come, Kalia, we'll now engage in that period of cross-examination. Right. And so how this will work, we will see the opposition team asking questions from team proposition. The time will start when you ask your first question, CV Bethel.
Okay, you want to ask it? Go ahead. Oh.
To the yes.
So once again, we are waiting on CV Bethel High School, the opposition team, to field questions to Glenmuir High School.
Okay, Glenmuir, how could Britain's finances increase if slaves were dying and deceased, resulting in constant labor loss?
Can you repeat, please?
The question is, how could Britain's finances increase if slaves were dying and deceased, resulting in constant labor loss?
The reason for this is that if we are to look at history, we would have to acknowledge the fact that it wasn't a one-time buying of African for the rest of that time period. Is continuous buying of African, buying Africans, Africans. They and they care that. That's what we're not choosing. These were malnourished, tortured, with that was an issue because in that Africans continuously died and Africa was always here, so they got more and more and more slaves. That is why the kill count for slavery is so high in the first place. Thank you.
Our next question. As we all know, Britain had one of the most advanced financial systems in Europe at that time. Wouldn't you agree that this financial system was more important in sustaining industrialization than the profits of slavery?
Yes, Britain had a very advanced where financial system from the trade to you're right, because merchants after saved Africans, they need their money somewhere. So if it was not for slavery, would have Britain this great financial
banks like
Thank you. Last question.
If Britain had no money, how could they afford to buy slaves to depend on them to progress their nation?
We're not saying that Britain did not have any money. We're saying that with the help from the profits from the trade, from the slavery, right? They used this profit and this wealth to propel themselves forward ahead of any other European nation in terms of innovation. So without this
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much to that first segment of the cross-examination period. At this point in time, we invite Glenmuir High School to pose questions to CV Bethel High.
Can you repeat that question for me, please?
the sources of capital, but can you name a single industry in the 18th century Britain that wasn't touched or impacted by slavery profits?
Awesome. So they had London Stock Exchange at that time, and the slave trade had nothing to do with the London Stock Exchange at that time, and allowed for unprecedented capital accumulation and investment in industrial enterprises. That had nothing to do with the slave trading at that time.
Ask another question. Question 5. Okay. If slavery wasn't crucial, why were Britain's biggest industry sectors, for example, cotton, sugar, iron, and shipbuilding, directly linked to slave labor and slave wealth?
Can you repeat the question, please?
If slavery wasn't crucial, Why were Britain's biggest industrial sectors, for example, cotton, sugar, iron, and shipbuilding, directly linked to slave labor?
They had innovation at that time in regards to, let's say, textiles. They had things like the power loom and all these steam engines at that time. They weren't linked with slave trades. And they were already existent before the existence of the slave trade. During that time, they were already there, being done by the British, who was already in the country. It was already being done way before the slave trade.
Okay, last question. If the Industrial Revolution was simply a result of British ingenuity and resources, why did Britain invest so heavily in slave-based enterprises and plantation economies for over 2 centuries?
Can you repeat that question, please?
If the Industrial Revolution was simply a result of British ingenuity and resources, then why did Britain invest so heavily in slave-based enterprises and plantation economies for over 2 centuries?
I'm sorry, you were having a little internet trouble on this end. Can you repeat that for us, please? We're unable to hear you.
If the Industrial Revolution was simply a result of British ingenuity and resources, then why did Britain invest so heavily in slave-based enterprises and plantation economies for over 2 centuries, 200 years?
Because at that time, they chose to do that. They needed the assistance at that time. We're not saying that it was not necessary. We're not saying that it was not needed at that time, but they chose to do that at that time. And according to the motion, the motion says that it would have been significantly delayed out the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. We're saying that it would not have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans.
All right, thank you very much for that exciting period of cross-examination. At this point in time, we now invite the second speaker from Glenmuir High School, Kalia Powell.
Cool. Honorable adjudicators, esteemed opponents, and valued audience, today we engage not just in debate, but in the pursuit of truth. In the heart of 18th century Britain, steam engines roared, factories multiplied, and cities swelled. The Industrial Revolution is often celebrated as a triumph of innovation and natural resources. But beneath this triumphant narrative lies an uncomfortable truth: the colossal human suffering and exploitation that made this revolution possible. Today, we stand firmly against the motion that this House believes that Britain's Industrial Revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. This is not just a historical footnote. It is the foundation stone of Britain's early economic success. Why does this matter? Because industrial revolutions do not occur in isolation. They require capital, markets, labor, and resources. In the absence of the transatlantic slave trade, Britain would have merely paused. It would have lost decades, perhaps even its dominance to other European powers. In this speech, I will respond to the opposition's anticipated arguments before presenting 2 key contentions. First, that slavery created financial infrastructure and trade networks that allowed Britain's industries to flourish, and second, that slavery provided the key products that fed the British economy at this time. Let me reiterate that the proposition is not saying that slavery started the Industrial Revolution, but it would have been significantly delayed without the benefits Britain reaped from slavery. We anticipate the opposition will argue that Britain's Industrial Revolution was fueled by domestic innovation and the availability of coal and iron. While these resources were indeed present, having the raw materials and innovative spirit alone is inefficient without the vast capital required to scale up production. Historian Eric Williams in Capitalism and Slavery argues that the profits obtained from the slave trade provided one of the main streams that accumulation of capital in England. The Liverpool merchant
merchants who dominated the triangular trade were not minor players. They built shipping empires, invested in factories, and founded banks. The second likely opposition point is that Britain abolished slavery before industrialization peaked, suggesting slavery was not crucial. However, this argument ignores timing and economic layering. The industrial momentum built in the 18th and early 19th centuries was financed by centuries of profits from the slave trade and slave-produced goods. As Williams also notes, by the time abolition occurred, the profits had already been converted into industrial capital, infrastructure, and global trading networks. The opposition, by disagreeing with the moot, is saying that you can climb a ladder, reach your position, push it down, then claim you never needed it to begin with. Lastly, they might argue that alternative sources of capital could have substituted for slavery. This is pure speculation. According to the article, The Shadow of the Past, How Much Did Slavery Contribute to the Economy? Approximately 5% of Britain's GDP in the early 1800s. While profits from the slave trade might seem insignificant, this 5% of GDP represented concentrated investable capital. The scale of wealth generated from slavery injected into British banks dwarfed what could have been sourced through domestic savings or other means. In short, without slavery, Britain would have had neither the financial muscle nor the economic velocity needed to industrialize ahead of its rivals, which were Germany and France. Having addressed these objections, let us turn to now our first key contention. Slavery created the financial infrastructure and global trade networks essential for Britain's industrial revolution. The triangular trade between Britain, West Africa, and the Caribbean not only generated immense profits, but also built the commercial and logistical foundations for modern capitalism. Cities like Liverpool and Bristol became commercial giants because of slave-based trade. By the late 18th century, Liverpool alone controlled over 80% of Britain's slave trade voyages. The wealth generated from these voyages funded the expansion of British banks and investment houses. According to historian Kenneth Morgan, the growth of British banking institutions during the 18th century can be directly traced to profits from slavery and slave-produced commodities. These same banks provided loans and capital to burgeoning industries, enabling entrepreneurs to invest in machinery, factories, and research. In other words, slavery was not merely a source of raw materials, but the engine behind the financial systems that made large-scale industrial investment possible. Secondly, slavery supplied the essential Let us not allow comfortable myths to obscure historical truth. Britain's industrial revolution did not materialize from thin air or pure ingenuity. It was lubricated by blood, built on forced labor, and financed by human suffering. The ships that carried enslaved Africans also carried profits that fueled the very engines of British industry. The global trade routes, financial systems, and raw materials sourced through slavery did not merely assist Britain's industrialization, they supercharged it. Without these advantages, Britain's rise would have been significantly delayed, if not overshadowed by rival European nations racing towards industrial supremacy. And so I leave you with this. Every cotton spindle spinning in Manchester, every steam engine firing in Birmingham, every bank vault opening in London, they all carried echoes of voices silenced in chains. To ignore this is not only pure history, but dangerous denial. On that basis, we must affirm this motion with conviction, which is this House believes that Britain's industrial revolution would have been significantly delayed without the trafficking in Africans. And with that, I rest.
Thank you very much to the second speaker from Glenmuir High School for that impassioned speech. We now invite the second speaker from C.V. Bethel Senior, Kenisha Wright, to present the case for that side of the house.
Put it on the screen.
The Industrial Revolution is often viewed as a defining moment in history, one that propelled Britain into an era of unprecedented economic and technological advancement. The transatlantic trafficking of Africans played a minuscule role in this transformation. To better understand this, we must be transparent, much like glass. While slavery undoubtedly contributed to Britain's economy, it was neither the primary catalyst nor an irreplaceable factor in the nation's industrial rise. Therefore, the opposition firmly believes that Britain's industrial revolution would not have significantly delayed with the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. The Deputy Prime Minister may attempt to allure you into thinking that slavery was the biggest and main source of Britain's economy and wealth by saying slavery created the global trade network for Britain. The wealth can be linked back to slave-produced labor. Like a flawless glass pane, stands transparent once you look through it. We, the opposition, reiterate the point of our opposition leader that states, Britain has already had economic dominance even before the slave trade, being in control of commerce. So the slave trade had nothing to do with the global wealth garnered from Britain. To inaugurate, Britain's industrial success relied on the productivity of its domestic labor force, proving that enslaved labor was not essential to the revolution. The rise of the industrial working class played a crucial role in Britain's economic transformation. Factory workers, coal miners, and artisans provided the labor.
Or point of information.
Except
if the slave trade and colonial profits were insignificant, why did cities like Liverpool, Bristol, and London explode into financial powerhouses directly from slave trade wealth?
Can you repeat that for me, please?
If the slave trade and colonial profits were insignificant, why did cities like Liverpool, Bristol, and London explode into financial powerhouses directly from slave trade wealth?
I'm not saying that it was insignificant. However, I'm saying that it was very minuscule. It played a little part in the wealth and the economic dominance that Britain already had via the London stock market and agriculture and other places and other things as well. Yes. Factory workers, coal miners, and artisans provided the labor that fueled industrial output. The rapid urbanization of cities like Manchester and Birmingham created dense populations of wage laborers who worked long hours in mills and mines. The Industrial Revolution and the Working Class, Cambridge History of the British Empire. Additionally, historian E.P. Thompson in The Making of the English Working Class documents how industrialization was sustained by poor and middle class. Not at this time, not by the presence of enslaved Africans, colonies. The transition from a feudal economy to a capitalist system created a large working class population whose productivity was key to Britain's rise as an industrial power. It is also worth noting that Britain continued to industrialize even after the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in 1807. If the revolution were dependent on slavery, one would expect its progress to slow or halt after abolition. Instead, Britain's industrial output surged, proving that the real foundation of its success laid in mechanization and domestic labor forces, not the trafficking of Africans. With these critical points in mind, it is evident that Britain's industrial success was built on the backs of its people. Secondly, Britain's transition to an industrial society was not solely dependent on the trafficking of Africans, since slavery was logistically challenging to sustain. Eric Williams, author of Capitalism and Slavery, highlights that the high death rates, pervasive illness, and ongoing labor loss, hence making it very difficult to be a good contribution to British industrial success. Eric Williams, 1944, Capitalism and Slavery, University of North Carolina Press. Africans held in slavery endured cruel treatment on plantations and in other settings involved forced labor, which resulted in severe exhaustion, malnourishment, and disease epidemics. David L. Teese, 2000, The Rise of African Slavery in the Americas, Cambridge University Press. Adjudicators, we can see that
Point of information.
I accept.
If the Industrial Revolution was simply a result of British ingenuity and resources, then why did Britain invest so heavily in slave-based enterprises and plantation economies for over 2 centuries? Oh my God, Mr. Absurdity. All right, can I ask the actual POI? My mistake. I am
No,
so
that is the
sorry.
question asked. You can respond to that, CV Bethel.
Okay, sir, no problem. No problem.
The floor is
Can it
yours.
be repeated, the question?
If industrial The Industrial Revolution was simply a result of British ingenuity and resources, then why did Britain invest so heavily in slave-based enterprises and plantation economies for over 2 centuries?
That wasn't the only thing that pushed Britain's economic and industrial growth. They invested into slavery, but not so heavily to the point where it became their main source of income and pushing Britain's industrial growth. Yes. Adjudicators, we can see that it's quite evident that slavery would eventually decline since the death rate struggled to compete with the demands of African laborers on the plantations alone. It does not speak to the deaths of thousands on the journey to this new land. The system was extremely unstable since many people died before they can even offer long-term labor. According to a Cambridge University Press article entitled "The Atlantic."
And that is time. Thank you very much, CV Bethel. We now move into the final period of cross-examination. At this point in time, we will ask CB Bethel Senior High School to field questions to Team Glenmuir High School. And the time will begin when you ask your first question, CB Bethel.
If enslaved labor was the key to industrialization, why didn't other slave-dependent economies like Brazil experience industrial revolution on the same scale as Britain?
Can you repeat, please?
If enslaved labor was key to industrialization, why didn't other slave-dependent economies like Brazil experience industrial revolution on the same scale as Britain?
These other countries, they lacked the necessary conditions for industrialization, such as a strong banking sector, political stability, and access to coal. Britain had all of these and capital from slavery. The key difference was how Britain used the wealth from slavery, investing in factories, infrastructure, and industrial machinery, whereas Brazil focused on maintaining colonial economies. That's the difference.
So you stated in your speech, Madam Prime Minister, that Britain didn't have the necessary funds without the slave trade. But just now you stated that they had the funding to do this without the slave trade. Where is the connection? Where is the disconnection if they already had the funds? Why are you stating that they did not have the funds without the slave trade?
Could you please clarify exactly what you're asking?
I'm asking, where is the connection? You stated that they did not have the funds without, Madam Prime Minister, you stated that without the funds from slave trade, they would not have had would not have had the funds. But just now you stated that they had the funds without the slave trade. Where's the connection? That's what I'm asking.
I said in addition.
She did not say that. What she said is that in addition to the funds that Britain already had, slavery propelled them in different sectors, right? Without slavery, the trading and exporting, it would not have pushed the way it did. Cotton, sugar, iron, coal, all these things was some way, somehow propelled by slavery. Without slavery there, again, we're not saying it would not have happened. However, it would have been significantly delayed because guess what? Slavery made money. That's why Britain kept them for 2 centuries. Slavery made money.
And it made a difference.
Thank you.
And your final question, CV Bethel.
If the slave trade was truly the foundation of Britain's Industrial Revolution, why did it decline? Why did it stop? Why did Britain stop it?
Repeat the question, please?
If the slave trade was truly the foundation of Britain's Industrial Revolution, why did it decline? Why did Britain stop investing in it and choose to invest in their other industries like coal mining and metal mining?
One last time for me. I'm so sorry.
We're having a little bit of internet issues. We really apologize for the inconvenience.
If the slave trade was truly the foundation of Britain's Industrial Revolution, why did they stop investing in it? Why did they choose to invest in other industries like coal mining and metal mining?
Okay, so first of all, right, the abolition of slavery occurred, right? And although the abolition of slavery occurred, they had already reaped the benefits from slavery in the first place.
And when slavery was abolished, guess what came in? Indentured servants. Because when slavery was abolished and slaves were taken out of the equation, it left a vacuum because money wasn't being made anymore. People were needed in the plantations to continue making the cotton, the sugar cane, all these things. So when Britain stopped investing, they invested in something else to supplement the labor lost. Thank you.
And thank you, both teams, for that period of cross-examination. At this point, we will pause the debate for 1 minute to allow the finishing touches to be placed on those reply speeches. And that 1 minute starts now.
Okay.
Sister, I think it's our turn to ask.
Indeed. Indeed.
Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. Hold on.
Okay, so if slavery wasn't the backbone of Britain's economy at the time, why did enslaved labor in the Caribbean and the Americas outproduce Britain's own workforce?
Can you repeat yourself for us? You're having a bit of internet trouble?
If slavery wasn't the backbone of Britain's economy, why did enslaved labor in the Caribbean and the Americas outproduce Britain's own workforce?
Slave reduction in the Caribbean did not outproduce Britain's workforce during the slave trade opportunity. Can you state your source first, please?
Keep in mind, I didn't say the Caribbean by itself. I said the Caribbean and the Americas.
Okay, I'm asking, can you state your sources for us, please?
No, there will be no back and forth on the cross question. You can only answer the question, CV Bethel.
Okay, so it did not outproduce Britain's Industrial Revolution. The moot states that it would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. So it did not outproduce it.
I'm going to answer. Okay. Can the opposition explain how Britain could have funded large-scale industrial projects without the capital amassed from profits gained through trafficking and exploitation of Africans at the pace it did? Can you explain that? So let's say, we can't explain, sorry. That's like this time.
Can you read the question, please? We're unsure what's the question here.
Can the opposition, explain how Britain could have funded large-scale industrial projects at the pace they did without the capital amassed from profits gained through the trafficking and exploitation of Africans?
So Britain had economic dominance during that period. And that was a key factor in its industrialization. That was built on banking and trade networks rather than the transatlantic slave trade. The London Exchange allowed for the accumulation of funds that was used for that building up.
Okay, so our final question. If the industrial economy was really self-sustaining, why did the government need to pay 20 million euros, equivalent to of the national budget at that time in compensation to the former slave owners after abolition of slavery?
Can you repeat yourself first, please?
If the industrial economy was self-sustaining, why did the government need to pay 20 million euros, equivalent to 40% of the national budget at that time, to former slave owners after abolition as compensation?
We're not stating that it's self-sustaining. We're not saying that it was self-sustained. We're not saying that it would have been self-sustained on its own. We're not stating that. We're saying that it assisted minusculely, very small, in the building up of the economy. We're stating that it was small, very small in the assistance of building up the economy. We're not saying what you said. Britain was already independent.
All right, and that concludes that period of cross-examination. Thank you, both teams. At this point in time, we will now pause for that minute to allow the finishing touches to be placed on the reply speeches. Thank you very much. That is 1 minute elapsed. Now to conclude the debate for Team CV Bethel Senior High School, we invite the opposition reply speaker.
Involvement in the transatlantic slave trade was like a glass that was already half full. It may have added to the nation's growth. It was already powerful before its participation. Fellow advocates, while the slave trade did bring economic benefits, it was not the foundation for Britain's industrialization. Even without the slaves, Britain would still have successfully transitioned from a farming society in 1760. Therefore, we disagree with the motion. This House believes that the British Industrial Revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. Adjudicators, the Deputy Prime Minister aims to convince you that the British Industrial Revolution would have been delayed without the transatlantic trafficking of Africans. Right? So what was also stated is that it is the foundation of Britain's Industrial Revolution. The Deputy Prime Minister also stated Britain wouldn't have the muscle to progress their industries to get ahead of their competitors without the slaves. However, the eventual decline of the African slave trade is a natural occurrence of a system that was not working. This deterioration would have diametrically impacted Britain if they had relied on the trafficking of Africans to solely fuel the Industrial Revolution. Also, Britain already had economic dominance and global commerce, and they would still have the development of joint stock companies
and the London Stock Exchange without participating in the slave trade. Intelligent opponents, James C. Robson created an article titled The British Empire, A History of Imperialism, that this country had the most powerful navy in the world, securing trade rights and ensuring the free flow of goods across the British Empire. Its shipping networks facilitated commerce in textiles, coal, and manufactured goods, and industries that grew exponentially due to Britain's industrial infrastructure, not simply because of raw materials supplied by slavery. Moreover, even without the use of slave labor, Britain continued to rise through the innovation of machinery and groundbreaking inventions. For example, spring jenny, an invention by James Hargreaves in 1764, revolutionized textile production by enabling a single worker to spin multiple threads simultaneously. National Archives. This is just one example of many inventions. Another key aspect of Britain's economic expansion was its foundation in banking, trade networks, and naval supremacy. According to historian Niall Ferguson in The Accent of Money, the financial history of the world, Britain's financial institutions and banking systems were the true engines of its economic expansion by 1914. Naval supremacy was crucial in protecting these trade routes and asserting Britain's global influence. Royal Navy's dominance allowed Britain to impose its worldwide trade and international relations, ensuring the security of its commercial industries, interests, and colonies. Library.fiverr.me. Additionally, slaves were not the only source of labor in Britain. Coal miners, artisans, workers also provided labor that fueled industrial production. Economic Observatory states coal mining was particularly significant, with mines employing a substantial portion of the workforce. In the 1900s, over 7% of working-age men were employed in coal mining. Furthermore, children and youth comprise a notable portion of the workforce in coal and metal mines, accounting for 19% to 40% of workers in these sectors in 1842. Correspondingly, slavery was an inherently problematic trade marked by immense complications, including high mortality rates, rampant diseases, and brutal conditions that caused untold suffering for those enslaved. In 1944, Eric Williams, author of Capitalism and Slavery in the University of North Carolina Press, stated that the high mortality rate, widespread disease, and constant loss of labor made it challenging for the slave trade to significantly contribute to Britain's industrial success. Also, an article from the Cambridge University Press by Harper S. Klein in 2010 placed that mortality rates on transatlantic journeys alone was high
All right, thank you very much. And now we invite the proposition reply speaker, Jovia Dawkins, to conclude this debate for Team Glenmuir High School.
3 minutes.
Ready when you're ready.
Wide. Okay, just to confirm again, am I being heard? Okay, lovely. Honorable judges, ever-trying opponents, I greet you. I am here to cement our argument and ensure you understand that we are right in agreeing to the moot, which says this House believes that Britain's Industrial Revolution would have been significantly delayed without the transatlantic trafficking in Africans. Mr. Speaker, let's get something straight. Disagreeing with the motion downplays the torture Africans went through on those plantations. However, we are not here to discuss ethics or morals or all that boring stuff. So let's talk logistics. I extend to the opposition this question. Where did all the cotton, sugar, gold, silver, tobacco, indigo, and dyes, amongst other resources used during the Industrial Revolution, come from, if not from enslaved labor? Let's address you a few things. The opposition has yet to identify evidence to prove that there was another contributor that made as much positive as the benefits of slavery to Britain. In fact, the throne the opposition is on is null, void, weak, and crumbling. The London Stock Exchange was associated with transatlantic slave trafficking of Africans, listing and facilitating investment in companies like the South Sea Company, which held contracts to supply to Spanish colonies. Additionally, the wealth generated from the slave trade and the slave-produced goods were reinvested through exchange, financing industries and institutions that profited from slavery. According to the legacies of British slave ownership, also the African had failed factor of the Industrial Revolution. Okay. Sorry, we dropped off for a minute. Also, the opposition has failed to identify. Am I being heard?
Yes, we're hearing you. You can go ahead.
Am I being heard?
We can hear you. You can go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Also, the opposition has still failed to identify the driving factor of the Industrial Revolution, but they only supplied various industries which were present during or post-industrial revolution as a result of the capital or managerial tactics present from the slave trafficking. Their second speaker mentioned that Britain already had economic dominance. However, it has been proven, noted, and discussed by economics and historians how, because slavery propelled the economy, allowing global expansion through exploitation, global influence, economic growth from the benefits of slavery. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just built on inventions like the steam engine, but other industries and the economy that made leaps and bounds because of the resources provided by the English colonies. Because of slavery, resources became easy and, most importantly, cheap. This is not conjecture, it is economic fact. Between 1780 and the 1800s, over 80% of the Britain's imported cotton came from slave plantations in the West Indies and American South. This cheap, abundant resource allowed textile mills in Manchester and Birmingham to flourish, generating employment and exports that spread further industrial investment. According to Low Country Digital Historic Initiative and the Black History Month UK, the reliability and affordability of slave-driven cotton made it indispensable to Britain's growing textile industry. According to the Faculty of History at Oxford University, this transition driven by slavery boosted Britain's economy and strengthened its global dominance. Cotton and sugar were the pillars of Britain's economic growth, funding trade, industrial expansion, and urbanization. Before slavery's economic benefits fully took hold, much of Britain's workforce remained in rural areas, leaving factories understaffed. However, as slavery reduced, the cost of goods like sugar, rice, yams, cassava, amongst other produce, living standards improved, populations grew, and workers migrated to the cities. Research by Princeton University supports the link between the affordability of goods and urbanization. Those slaves weren't in those factories, it was slaves who pushed workers into those factories. By no means are we saying the Industrial Revolution wouldn't have taken place, as our opponents would have argued. The innovation and geniuses were still there. However, without the convenience of slavery, mind you, the convenience of slavery, what would Britain be left with? Looking for resources, looking for funding, negotiating prices, spending millions on said outsourced resources without the influx of trading to supplement the money spent. There would be grappling for workers, and the list would go on and on and on. There is no way our opposition can agree that there wouldn't be a significant negative impact on the timeline to the Industrial Revolution if slavery wasn't there to cushion the economy and production of the Industrial Revolution. I thank you.
And thank you very much to Glenmuir High School for concluding this debate. The judges rather will now excuse themselves to deliberate and return to you shortly with the results of this match.
Good afternoon. My name is Brittany McLennan. And my name is Latonia Bassir. My name is Gandhi Williams. And we are the Glenmuir High School. Reparation means recognizing the traumas put into the psyche and structural arrangements through slavery and colonization territories, which inflicted not only individual injuries, but inequality on their subject populations.
They're not just about money. They're about acknowledging harm, restoring dignity, and taking steps towards fairness. Reparation challenges us to confront our shared history and create a future built on justice and equity.
It acknowledges that healing is not just about words, but positive action. It is a promise to future generations not to see the atrocities of the past under the rug.
Greetings from the city that rules the Big Club. Reparations matter because justice matters.
They're about addressing the past and building a fair future for all.
Reparations can bridge the gaps caused by history, creating opportunities for growth.
Debating isn't just about arguments,
but fostering solutions that lead to progress.
This competition is a platform to inspire change and amplify all.
Let's start the conversation. Let's make an impact.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this International Reparation Debate Competition. This International Reparation Debate Competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
And this initiative is phenomenal. And you know why? Because it's engaging with young people. And it's young people that I believe, are going to be the future of the reparatory justice movement. The greatest weapon that there is in this whole fight for reparatory justice is the young people of today. I hope this debate spurs a whole new generation of advocates for reparatory justice. And the UK and the EU have got to make amends for the ills of the transatlantic slavery. This is going to be a phenomenal competition.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional stroke international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Where is the justice for the 5 million enslaved Africans trafficked to the Caribbean? Think about it. Chattel slavery didn't just end, it left deep, painful scars across each Caribbean country. The deliberate underdevelopment, the brutal trauma and violence we inherited. It's time to repair this damage so we can build thriving, sustainable economies where young people like us can dream big, achieve more, and live better lives right here in our own home. Do you see why repair matters? Stand with us. Join the cause for justice and sign the petition for reparations at repaircampaign.org/petition.
It's very important that this is understood, because we can't talk about legacies before talking about what left those legacies on our landscape. Enslaved Africans were subjected to the worst atrocities imaginable: kidnapping, storage in filthy barracoons, the Middle Passage, forced drowning as in the case of the slaver Zong, branding with hot iron, including by the church, with SPG being seared into the flesh of those they owned, unrelenting field and factory labor, legal codes that rendered them non-human, and harsh punishments when they resisted enslavement, deportation, dismemberment, hanging, imprisonment, severe flogging, including of women and children. According to Lucille Matherin Mayer, and I quote, "Neither age nor pregnancy exempted women from corporal punishment. Rather, they were laid down in the filthiest place the driver could find for floggings. Child labor was rampant, and women and girls faced sexual violence." Orlando Patterson wrote in his Sociology of Slavery the following: "The sexual exploitation of female slaves by white men was the most disgraceful aspect of Jamaican slave society." Unfortunately, the church was complicit in this crime against humanity. Initially, Christian planters did not think that the African was of theological significance. According to Elsa Gavaya, and I quote, "Early English slave law almost totally neglected the enslaved as a subject for religious instruction, as a member of a family, or as a member of society possessing some rights, as the same rights as everyone else."
Did you grow up on Anansi stories? Yep, most of us have. But did you know that Anansi played a major role in our ancestors' survival? So let's talk about it. He's more than just a trickster spider. He was a means of inspiration for resistance.
Anansi's cleverness in outsmarting his rivals mirrored tactics enslaved people used in their daily lives. By pretending to be foolish or inept, a technique known as play fool for catch wise, enslaved people lowered their enslavers' expectations and reduced suspicion. These methods, inspired by Anansi, are known as Anansi tactics, or in Twi from Ghana, Anansi Sem. Anansi outwitted powerful animals and even white enslavers using cunning and wit. During the plantation era, Anansi tales were shared in enslaved quarters and sometimes in front of European enslavers. These stories, recorded in journals, reveal how enslaved people used public performances to mask hidden defiance. Plantation whites often missed the rebellious messages in these tales. Caribbean Anansi stories depict him evading punishment, tricking enslavers, and a whole plethora of adventures which highlight the resistance and survival through Anansi tactics.
400 years ago. 400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what would be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? Oh, the drums, listen,
Alright,
dance,
back.
communicate. For
Teams,
tonight, we
let me
fight
be
a battle,
transparent.
not
You will
even
not be
death
along,
could spare. Blue eyes, white skin,
Louis.
Master said that's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get our strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave, rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
And here's what does need reparative justice. It is the seasoning period when we landed on the soil and they took away our names and our gods and our culture, and no slave system that we understand thus far has ever had that deculturalization process embedded in the process of our enslavement. So our enslavement was not just physical, it was not just cultural, it was spiritual, because you took me away from everything. Who then must I look up to? Who then must I emulate? Who then must I kill myself in order to elevate you?
What is common about the wealth? A flag raises high, but the strings still pull from London. We sing our anthems in borrowed tongues, march to the beat of siphons' drums, celebrating a freedom that still pays tribute. Independent? What is that when the governor's shadow still lingers? They tell us, we free. Tell that to the bones at Rappery. The 196 who fought and won only to drown in chains. Our Negmawa. Do the people of North Devon not hear the howls raging for their home? The tide spits their cries, their names foam in fury, salted by a sea that will not forget.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back and we have the results of this match. The debate focused on whether or not we should attribute Britain's Industrial Revolution so greatly to the transatlantic trafficking in Africans, and more specifically, if it would have been significantly delayed. I want to thank both teams for what was a rich and robust debate. After deliberations, the judges have concluded by a unanimous decision that the team that will be advancing to round 2 of this competition is a team in proposition Glenmuir High School, ending on 282 points. CV Bethel High School did an admirable job, ending their debate on 272 points. The best speaker for the match comes to us from Team Glenmuir High School, and that is Joshua Smith, the first speaker. I want to say congratulations to Glenmuir High School, and I must say quite an impressive match from CV Bethel High School, a score of 272. Yes, indeed, is nothing to scoff at. That is a debate-winning score in other matches. So congratulations, Glenmuir High School, and well played, CV Bethel.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Amidst the various challenges that we face through connectivity and other things, we are really grateful just for the opportunity to be a part of this debate competition. And we salute you, CV Bethel. You were a
Excellent match.
Formidable opponent, and we are really grateful for this opportunity.
And we are thankful for the opportunity, and we're looking forward to debating more powerful teams as we go by to strengthen ourselves and our colleagues. Thank you so much.
One final thing. Would you mind repeating the final scores?
Sure. So Glenmuir High School ends on 282 points and CV Bethel's 272.
It's not a 12 point,
Okay,
it's a
thank you
10
very
point.
much.
Ladies and gentlemen, join us very soon as we enter into the next match of the day. We will see rather Hampton School face off against Manchester High School, and they will be debating the motion. This house prefers reparation be invested in structural development such as healthcare and education rather than giving as a lump sum payments to governments. We'll see you then. All right, that's